Female CEO challenged a black mechanic. "Fix this engine and I'll marry you." Then he did. The hum of silence inside the Cole Dynamics boardroom was broken by a voice sharp enough to cut steel. Miranda Cole, the formidable CEO, leaned across the polished oak table and let the words fall like a dare. "Fix this engine and I'll marry you." Laughter exploded. Executives exchanged smug glances. Engineers who had failed for months smirked, enjoying the spectacle. To them, the line wasn't a promise. It was a punchline. Across the room, Jordan Price stood in his worn jacket, hands scarred from years of honest work. He didn't laugh. His calm eyes studied the prototype engine at the center of the room, as if it were speaking a language only he could hear. Miranda's gaze lingered on him, equal parts mockery and challenge. To her, this was theater. The mighty CEO reminding her empire that outsiders didn't belong in her world. To Jordan, it was something else entirely. The stakes were clear. This machine had consumed millions of dollars, the brightest minds in the company, and countless failed attempts. If Jordan failed, he would be remembered as a fool who didn't belong. If he succeeded, the entire room would have to reckon with what that meant. The smirks faded when he finally stepped forward. He said nothing. He simply placed his hand on the cold metal, and the boardroom fell into uneasy silence. What could this mechanic possibly see that the best engineers had missed? The engine sat like a wounded beast in the middle of the Cole Dynamics boardroom. Polished metal, tangled wires, a monument to ambition that refused to obey its creators. Around it, executives whispered, smirks curling on their faces as they studied the man who dared to approach it. Miranda Cole leaned back in her chair, the skyline of the city burning through the glass behind her. She had built this empire from nothing, brick by brick, deal by deal. Every headline had called her relentless, brilliant, unstoppable. What the headlines never mentioned was how pride had become the armor she never removed. Success had hardened her. Failure was something she did not tolerate, not in her company, not in herself. Jordan Price was a contrast that made the room uneasy. No tailored suit, no polished shoes, just steady hands that had spent more years under car hoods than in classrooms. He had grown up fixing machines no one else wanted, in a garage where parts were borrowed, bent or rebuilt until they worked. He had no diploma hanging on a wall, no degree stamped with approval. His only credential was patience. His only education was listening to the stories that broken machines whispered when others gave up. The engineers surrounding the table had never respected that kind of education. They leaned toward one another, voices dripping with contempt. "Grease will not save you here," one of them muttered loud enough for the room to hear. Another chuckled. "This is not a tractor, it is aerospace technology." Their laughter was easy, almost rehearsed. They did not expect him to last 5 minutes. Miranda smirked, watching the scene with the cold precision of a queen testing her court jester. She thrived on challenges, but this one amused her. She was fully confident he would fail. And when he did, her empire would stand taller, because she had proved once again that outsiders had no place at her table. Jordan, however, did not rise to their bait. He did not defend himself, did not answer their mockery. His silence was not weakness, it was composure. He moved closer to the machine, brushing his fingers lightly across the surface as if tracing a story the others could not see. The contrast grew sharper with every heartbeat. Miranda's world was skyscrapers and shareholders, contracts sealed with signatures that cost millions. Jordan's world was oil-stained concrete floors and nights lit by a single bare bulb swinging from a garage ceiling. She commanded boardrooms filled with the brightest engineers money could hire. He commanded nothing but his own quiet focus. And yet in that moment, the balance of power felt uncertain. The engineers who had laughed began to fall quiet, their amusement not fully masking an undercurrent of curiosity. Why did he seem so calm when everyone else was certain of his failure? Miranda noticed it too. The ease in his shoulders, the steady way he studied the engine as if it were already telling him its secrets. Confidence without arrogance. Silence that carried weight. It unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The room waited for him to stumble, to freeze, to reveal he was out of his depth. But Jordan did not stumble. He did not freeze. He simply bent down, listening with his hands, his mind, and something more, something the others did not understand. He had not come here to win a bet. He had come because broken things deserved one last chance to be heard. And for reasons no one in the boardroom could explain, that calm unsettled them more than any boastful speech ever could. Jordan Price said nothing as he stepped closer to the engine. The boardroom lights reflected off the polished casing, but he was not dazzled by its shine. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing arms marked by years of labor. The quiet scrape of metal against his skin did not bother him. This was familiar ground even if the setting was not. His grease-stained fingers moved slowly across the surface, tracing bolts, seams, and grooves that had been overlooked. To the engineers it looked like fumbling. To Jordan it was reading. Machines had a language, one most people were too impatient to hear. Every vibration, every scratch, every worn corner told a story of stress, friction, and neglect. Miranda Cole leaned back in her chair, arms folded tightly across her chest. She did not interrupt. Her smirk carried a silent message. She was waiting for him to fail, waiting for the boardroom to see what she already believed, that this man did not belong in her world. Whispers circled the room. "He is wasting time," one engineer muttered. Another shook his head. "We ran dozens of simulations. If there was anything that simple, we would have seen it." Their voices carried disdain, but beneath the arrogance was a nervous edge. The longer Jordan worked without hesitation, the less certain they became. Jordan did not answer them. He never looked up, never defended himself. His silence was louder than their ridicule. He worked as if no one else existed, his focus locked on the machine in front of him. One by one, he loosened screws, slid back panels, and tilted the components into the light. His hands were steady, not rushing, but not wasting a single second either. The hum of the city outside was swallowed by the weight of the moment. Every eye in the boardroom followed his movements. Miranda's pen tapped once, sharp against the table, a reminder of her impatience. Yet she did not stop him. Something about his composure kept her watching. Then his fingers paused. Near the intake manifold, a line barely visible caught his attention. He leaned closer, brushing dust away until the faintest crack revealed itself. Hairline thin, almost invisible under the glare. He ran his finger across it again, his eyes narrowing slightly. It was enough to throw the entire system off balance. But Jordan did not announce his discovery. He did not point to it triumphantly, did not throw his victory in their faces. Instead, he moved on, tracing the wiring with the same deliberate care. It was there he noticed another flaw, a misaligned cable, routed against the housing in a way that disrupted the sensor feed. Miscommunication disguised as failure, a small mistake carrying enormous consequences. Still, he said nothing. He tucked the knowledge away, working with the patience of a man who understood that timing mattered more than pride. The tension in the room thickened. To the engineers watching, he appeared to be wasting minutes they could not afford. To Miranda, it was confirmation of what she already believed. Skill without pedigree was nothing more than guesswork. And yet, something about his silence unsettled her. He was too calm, too steady, as if he already knew more than he was letting on. The room held its breath. Was Jordan Price truly onto something that their brightest minds had overlooked? Or was this just the slow unraveling of a man out of his depth? The answer, hidden in the quiet rhythm of his hands, had not yet been revealed. Hours stretched into a heavy silence, broken only by the clink of Jordan's tools against the steel frame. Sweat slid down his temple, but his hands did not waver. Every movement carried patience, as if the clock itself bent to his rhythm. The engineers shifted in their seats, impatience turning into mockery. One called out with a laugh, "Still stuck, mechanic. Maybe engines in your garage are easier than this." Another added, "This is not a tractor. You are in the wrong place." Their words filled the room like static, but Jordan's calm absorbed the noise. Miranda's voice cut through sharper than the rest. Leaning forward, her eyes glinted with disdain. "Even my interns could have told you that," she said, her tone laced with mock amusement. Every syllable carried weight, designed to remind Jordan of his supposed place far below her polished empire. Yet he did not look up. His silence unsettled them more than any response could. The engineers expected anger, excuses, or a defensive word. Instead, Jordan tightened a bolt, adjusted a wire, and moved on without a single glance. It was as if he heard a different conversation, one spoken only between him and the machine. Whispers began to circle the boardroom. Some smirked, but others frowned, unsettled by his composure. Why was he so steady when failure loomed so close? Why did his eyes carry certainty while theirs searched for flaws? Jordan wiped the sweat from his forehead, but his focus never broke. His hands moved with a rhythm born from years in the garage, not from textbooks or polished laboratories. Every motion carried intent. Every tool placed against the engine had meaning. The engineers leaned closer, their smirk slowly slipping. For hours they had mocked him, but now something felt different. His silence was no longer awkward. It was commanding. He was not fumbling, he was choosing. Jordan traced the wiring again, his eyes sharp and steady. He reached into the maze of metal and tightened bolts that had been overlooked countless times. A cracked tube sat beneath the surface like a ticking clock. He replaced it without comment, as if fixing what others had missed was second nature. Miranda crossed her arms and tilted her head. Her smile was still there, but it no longer radiated the same confidence. She was watching too carefully now, studying every detail. It was the first sign that her certainty was beginning to waver. The room's air grew heavier. Engineers who had been whispering cruel jokes earlier now stood in silence, shifting uncomfortably in their tailored suits. The mechanic they dismissed was slowly rewriting the rules of the room. Jordan looked up only once. His voice was calm, steady, and carried across the boardroom. "Silence, please." The words were not a demand. They were a statement of authority, and strangely, everyone obeyed. The laughter died. The whispers stopped. The entire weight of Cole Dynamics waited for what would happen next. He rested his palm gently on the ignition. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, the engine roared to life. The sound shook the room like thunder breaking through a storm. The machine that Cole Dynamics' top engineers had labeled a failure now growled with raw power. For the first time since its creation, the prototype lived. Gasps erupted across the table. Pens dropped. Eyes widened. Some engineers stumbled backward as though the sound itself had shoved them. The impossible had been made real before their very eyes. Miranda's confident smile shattered. She leaned forward, eyes locked on the engine, her voice caught between disbelief and anger. The certainty she carried into that room drained from her face in an instant. Jordan stepped back, his hands still streaked with grease, his eyes calm and unshaken. He did not celebrate. He did not gloat. He simply stood in quiet contrast to the chaos of shocked voices filling the room. One of the engineers stammered, But that should not be possible. We tried everything." Jordan finally broke his silence with words that cut deeper than the sound of the engine itself. "Sometimes the smallest cracks bring down the strongest machines." The statement was not about tubing or wiring. It was about pride. It was about arrogance. It was about the blind spots created when confidence turns into carelessness. Every person in the room knew it. Miranda most of all. The camera of the mind lingers here. Miranda frozen in her seat, her authority slipping, her empire shaken. Across from her, the humble mechanic who had been mocked now stood taller than anyone in the skyscraper. This was no longer about engines. This was about the cost of pride. And the rise of humility. If Jordan could expose the flaws in Cole Dynamics' most prized creation, what other truths was he about to uncover? Miranda Cole took one step forward, and for the first time in years her shoes felt heavy. The room that once bent to her authority no longer belonged to her. Every eye was locked on her, waiting to see how the woman who built Cole Dynamics would respond. Her jaw tightened, but the usual fire in her expression faltered. She stared at the engine, alive and growling, its hum mocking the silence around it. The machine had chosen its victor, and it was not her. Miranda had not been handed her empire. She had clawed her way to the top in a world that expected her to fail. Every boardroom she walked into as a young woman was filled with men who smirked, who questioned, who dismissed. She fought them with sharp words, sharper decisions, and an ambition that refused to break. But over time, that armor hardened into pride. And pride had blinded her. Miranda lifted her chin, fighting to steady her breath. She could feel her board waiting, her engineers frozen, their faith slipping from her shoulders onto Jordan's. Her voice cracked slightly before she steadied it. "He did what my top minds could not." Gasps followed, but no one dared speak. Cole Dynamics had just witnessed the unthinkable, their invincible CEO admitting defeat. Miranda's polished nails tapped the conference table once, an unconscious tremor breaking through her composure. She wanted to fight, to reclaim control, but the evidence roared in front of her. Jordan Price had achieved the impossible, and no amount of power or pride could erase it. Jordan did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply picked up a rag, wiped the grease from his hands, and nodded respectfully. His humility was a blade sharper than any insult. It cut through the arrogance of the room and left a mark no one could ignore. Miranda looked at him again. For years, she had measured respect in victories, in acquisitions, in the fear she commanded. Now, in this single moment, she realized respect could also be earned through quiet skill and unwavering patience. The engineers sat rigid in their chairs, uncomfortable witnesses to the fall of their leader. Their mocking laughter from earlier now hung like a ghost, a reminder of their own arrogance. Miranda's throat tightened. She had spent her life proving she was stronger than every man in the room, stronger than every obstacle placed in her path. Yet here she stood, facing a mechanic from a small town, and it was his silence that stripped her defenses away. Her hand brushed against the edge of the polished table. The empire she built suddenly felt fragile, as though the very walls of the skyscraper were thinner than the tubing Jordan had replaced. Still, she spoke again, her words heavier this time. Respect where it is due. Jordan Price has done what we believed impossible. The sentence carried the weight of surrender, but also of acknowledgement. She had mocked him, underestimated him, dismissed him. Now she had no choice but to honor him. Jordan gave a slight nod and set the rag down. To him, it was never about humiliating her. It was about fixing what was broken, whether machine or mindset. The room had seen a CEO humbled and a mechanic elevated. But humility is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of a decision. The question was no longer whether Miranda respected Jordan. It was what she would do with that respect. Would Miranda cling to her pride, or would she take the harder road, transforming herself and her empire with the lesson Jordan had forced her to see? Miranda Cole stood in silence for a long moment, letting the hum of the engine fill the room. The weight on her chest eased, not because she had won, but because she had finally allowed herself to face the truth. When she spoke, her voice no longer carried the sharpness of command. It was softer, steadier, more human. Jordan Price has shown us something far greater than engineering skill. He reminded us that wisdom is not measured only in titles or degrees. Sometimes the clearest vision belongs to the one who listens, observes, and refuses to give up. The board shifted uncomfortably. These were words they had never expected to hear from her. Engineers who once smirked at Jordan now avoided his gaze, ashamed of their laughter. For them, this was not only a revelation about the machine, it was a reckoning about themselves. Jordan offered no speech. He simply folded the rag, placed it on the table, and stepped back. He did not need to explain what he had done. The roaring engine spoke for him. The narrator's voice carried the moral outward, stitching it into something larger than the boardroom. Never underestimate the overlooked. Respect runs deeper than pride, and humility carries a power that arrogance can never hold. Miranda lowered her eyes to her reflection in the polished surface of the table. She remembered her younger self, walking into boardrooms where men refused to take her seriously. Back then, she had thought pride was her armor, that only sharp edges could protect her. But now she understood. Armor can also trap, harden, and blind. Inwardly, she whispered to herself, I thought power was my shield. But today, humility rebuilt my strength. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Not the practiced smile of a CEO closing a deal, but the quiet smile of someone who had finally learned. The boardroom began to stir. People stood, still stunned, still uneasy. Yet something had shifted. Miranda knew that from this moment forward, Cole Dynamics would not just be her empire. It would also be a place where respect could flow in every direction, not only from the top down. Jordan glanced at her once, gave a respectful nod, and started toward the door. He had no need to linger. His work was finished, but Miranda's voice stopped him. Jordan. He turned, waiting. You have not only fixed our engine, you have reminded me of something I had forgotten, and for that I'm grateful. Jordan gave another quiet nod. Nothing more. That was his way. Who in your life have you underestimated? And what lesson might they be holding for you?